Shuckle is a fan favorite Pokemon. Everybody loves him. It's very fun to romanticize the extremity of Shuckle's stats. The terrible offense, but the elite defense, where you can use moves like Toxic and Rest and Infestation to stall out your opponent. You can turn into a stalling machine, shutting down even the strongest Pokemon. Not too shabby for such a tiny Pokemon. But the truth is that Shuckle isn't very good when you use it like that. Versus an AI, yeah, it can be good, but then again, everything is good when you're playing in-game. But versus another human being who can play around it, not that much. Moves like Taunt, Pokemon immune to poison, they can all actually beat Shuckle. The problem is that Shuckle doesn't do anything. It doesn't immediately threaten anything, and most competent players can simply switch around it. Its stalling movesets are gimmicks you see at the bottom of the ladder. They're not very good. But that's not the only way to use Shuckle. There's a better way to use it. There is a better moveset, and here is where it gets interesting. The other way to use Shuckle is as a Sticky Web support Pokemon. Sticky Web is a great, if not the best, supporting move in Pokemon. It's capable of lowering your grounded opponent's speed when they switch in. This enables a lot of powerful strategies. The most straightforward example is using strong, tanky attackers. Ordinarily, the disadvantage of a strong, slow attacker is that they get outsped by fast but frail Pokemon. Not anymore. There are other examples too, like Swords Dance Sweepers becoming a lot better because they don't have to worry about your speed. Maybe instead of Dragon Dance Hexors, if you have Sticky Web, you go with Swords Dance Hexors. You really do have a lot of options when you don't have to worry about your speed. Speed is the most fundamentally important stat in the game of Pokemon. It's the difference between Torterra knocking out Empoleon with Earthquake or Empoleon knocking out Torterra with Ice Beam. If you control the speed, you control the game. That is a core reason why Sticky Web is so good. It's why in Generation 9, Ribombee is a top 10 used Pokemon in Ubers, the format meant for legendary Pokemon. But coming back to Shuckle, with a mental herb to stop Taunt, Shuckle uses Sticky Web and Stealth Rock, Encore to stop setup Pokemon, and then has two options. One is to sacrifice itself with Final Gambit, a move that knocks out the user. The point of Final Gambit isn't to try and do damage with Shuckle's pitiful base 20 HP, it's to sacrifice itself so that a stronger Pokemon can come in and take its place in the battle. Or the other option is the move Infestation to trap your opponent and get residual damage, because that's the most damage Shuckle's going to be able to do. The reason you'd use Shuckle over other Sticky Web Pokemon is that because it also gets Stealth Rock, an almost mandatory move in the singles metagame. In most battles, Shuckle can leverage its high defensive stats to get Sticky Web up and ideally Stealth Rock too. So is Shuckle a good Pokemon with Sticky Web? Yes, but also no. Well, kind of. Let me explain. Smogon's tiering system organizes Pokemon based on how often they're used because people play to win, so the best Pokemon get used the most often. The tiering system lets you use your favorites in a lower tier where they can shine, and the system is created through essentially natural selection. Unfortunately, Shuckle has almost always been at the lowest tier. Shuckle is generally speaking not a highly used Pokemon. That's because Shuckle's viability is directly tied to two things. One is the viability of Sticky Web itself. For example, in Generation 9, Sticky Web is generally good because a lot of Pokemon lost access to Defog, and specific to OU, you have Golden Go who can block Rapid Spin and Defog. Shuckle isn't in Generation 9, but Ribombee thrives in Gen 9 and is a popular Sticky Web Pokemon. But in Generation 8, however, Sticky Web is generally worse off because there's a lot of Pokemon that know Defog. Also, it was a generation that introduced Heavy Duty Boots, a move that makes you immune to Sticky Web. Sticky Web as a whole is either good or bad depending on the context. Second is that you have to compare Shuckle to the other Sticky Web Pokemon available. Every Sticky Web Pokemon has its pros and cons. Shuckle is good if you want Sticky Web and Stealth Rock on the same Pokemon. Ribombee would be good if you want a fast Pokemon, but it's only available in Generation 7 onwards. And Kricketune is Kricketune, nobody will ever use that Pokemon. But everything is about context. This video is about the one metagame where Sticky Web Shuckle was so ridiculous it actually got banned. The year was 2014 and the tier was Generation 6 RU, the third tier. Shuckle was dominating the RU tier back in 2014 2014 to the point where in a community vote, 89% of the community voted to ban it. That is a ridiculous number and shows how dominant Shuckle was in that particular metagame. But why? Why Generation 6 RU of all metagames? Generation 6 as a whole is very friendly to Sticky Web. For one, heavy duty boots didn't exist yet, so that was massive, but there was also a lack of good defog Pokemon compared to Generation 7, which added a lot of defog Pokemon. Even in Gen 6 OU, the first tier, Sticky Web was popular and at points people wanted to ban it. But Shuckle was tearing up RU, not OU, with that Sticky Web idea. At that power level, it could easily get up a Sticky Web and Stealth Rock, and it was tough to take advantage of. If you tried to use Shuckle as fodder and use a move like Dragon Dance, it could use Encore. Taunt didn't work versus that moveset because of Mental Herb, and even if you could somehow have a move that could one-hit KO Shuckle, Shuckle has Sturdy anyway. Espeon, a good Magic Bounce Pokemon, was a UU Pokemon, and Xatu had Magic Bounce, but generally speaking wasn't a very good Pokemon in RU, evidenced by the fact that it was an NU Pokemon. Xatu's an example of a Pokemon that would be really good versus Shuckle, but would be mediocre versus the rest of the tier. For the most part, Shuckle's Sticky Web was unstoppable. Then, depending on the team, it would likely get Stealth Rock up too. But here's the thing, that's true about Shuckle in every meta, that's what it's supposed to do. So why Gen 6 RU specifically? The difference here is the Pokemon around Shuckle. Again, it's about the context. For one, coincidentally, two top Pokemon in RU were massive Sticky Web supporting Pokemon. Doublade was independently one of the top Pokemon in the tier, and its massive bulk with Eviolite made it a very effective spin blocker. You couldn't rapid spin away Sticky Web because Doublade's ghost typing would stop it. Even if Sticky Web didn't exist, Doublade was an elite RU Pokemon on its own merit. Also, if you wanted, RU also happened to have another interesting ghost type Pokemon in Mega Banette. Number 2, similarly, Braviary was also a top Pokemon, and its ability Defiant means it doubles attack if you use Defog because Defog lowers your evasiveness. Dealing with a +2 Braviary is a nightmare for any RU team. Doublade and Braviary formed an easy backbone for a Sticky Web team because they were already top Pokemon in the format. On top of that, it happens that RU was filled with slow but strong attackers, the perfect beneficiary for Sticky Web. One big threat was Boom Burst Exploud with Fire Blast and Surf. Exploud's scrappy ability means Ghost-type Pokemon can't wall it. Boom Burst is an incredibly strong move, and Fire Blast and Surf hit Steel and Rock-type Pokemon respectively. Then, there were more threats like Reckless High Jump Kick Hitmonlee, Choice Specs Tinted Lens Yanmega, Moltres, the list goes on and on. Gen 6 RU was a perfect storm for Sticky Web as a strategy. The top strategy was to get Sticky Web up and then bulldoze your opponent with RU's best Pokemon. Stealth Rock was particularly valuable because Moltres, Gale Wings Fletchlinder, and Yanmega were some of the top flying type RU Pokemon. When you try to counter Sticky Web, you obviously think of flying type Pokemon because they are immune to Sticky Web. But back before heavy duty boots, these Pokemon were taking so much damage from Stealth Rock that in practice they were easy to overwhelm. The circumstances made it so that Sticky Web was too dominant and not very fun. It's similar in idea to banning Deoxys Speed in standard play. Deoxys Speed doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's amazingly good at supporting a team with hazards that it's considered too strong. The community held a vote to ban Shuckle, and 89% of people agreed to ban it, thus ending the Shuckle era of RU. But why Shuckle and not Sticky Web as a whole? If you merely replaced Shuckle with a Sticky Web Leavenny or Ariados, it was much less effective because the key was A, Shuckle's reliability in getting it up, and B, its ability to possibly also get Stealth Rock up too. Other Pokemon like Leavenny didn't have Sturdy built in, so it needed Focus Sash, and then if that happens, then they can't hold Mental Herb to stop Taunt. Similarly, Smeargle could get taunted too. Shuckle got some usage in the higher tiers of Gen 6 too, and it was a good Pokemon, but it never got banned. It wasn't the perfect storm like it was for Gen 6 RU. Shuckle never really picked up in the later gens, which either had a lot of defog Pokemon or heavy duty boots or both. Shuckle took advantage of the one time it had a perfect opportunity, and that's the story of the one time Shuckle was overpowered.